So we are going to start by taking a look at finishing up the PowerPoints from Chapter 1. And I think we left off talking about ERISA last time. Does that sound about right? We're talking about vesting and pension security, I think was the last act we talked about, if memory serves. So can somebody remind me what vesting refers to, what the concept of vesting refers to? Into what? Yep, into a pension. So any sort of savings vehicle for retirement, could be a 401k, could be a simple plan, could be a 403b, which is for a nonprofit. So for example, at the University of Montana, I'm not in a 401k, I'm in a 403b. Any instrument like that that takes money from both employees and employers, you always get your own money back, right? I mean, the interest or dividends you earn on it, but vesting pertains to the money your employers put in on your behalf. And what ERISA said is you have to start vesting within 3 years, and you've got to be 100% vested within 6 years. Okay? And it also said that when I put money as an employer, when I put money into a pension, I have to send it to a third party, and they're charged with its well-being and investing it in a pragmatic manner. Okay, it's not sitting in my checking account anymore because that lends itself to improprieties. The ERISA, the Employer Retirement Income Security Act, also provides for something called the PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corp. And that's a branch of the federal government that insures your pension. So even if with all the other things, the trustee and the vesting schedule, if something still goes amiss, and I've worked my whole life for, Tyson Foods, and I get there and I'm 65 and it's time to start getting my check, and something's happened, this agency will guarantee my benefits, this federal agency. With that said, they are currently insolvent. So that's much of our federal. So I don't know if I rely on that, but and one thing I will just tell you, this is a personal reflection, that the biggest crashes have happened with things like, the TICAs and the WorldComps, where you're earning, your paycheck comes from one organization, and all of your investing for the future is in that same agency or organization. Is that smart planning? I don't want to have my source of income and all my investments wrapped up in one company. I want to diversify my investments from my source of income. So that's just a thought out there. It's not in the book, you're not going to read that anywhere, but I mean, just as a personal philosophy, I think it's very important to divest your investment sources from your income stream. And these are just all some requirements. You got to file a Form 5500. And anybody that's 21 years or older after completing 1 year of service has got to be eligible for your pension plan at your company. Okay, continuing to go through major pieces of legislation that impact payroll processing. Of course, you've all heard of ACA. It's called Obamacare, or it's nicknamed Obamacare, but that's generally what lay people call it now. And it has two facets to it: the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act and Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. And it was passed in 2010, but it's been phased in over the last 7 years. And as we speak now, it's being not really phased out because it hasn't been repealed, but key tenets of it have been chipped away at based upon the philosophy of the current administration. And so there's major pieces of ACA that will no longer be implemented or no longer be mandated. So some of this is obsolete that I'm teaching you as we speak, because the textbook was published before the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was passed in December 2017. So, the whole purpose of ACA, and I feel like we've kind of lost sight of this societally. When Obama came into office in 2008, any idea how many Americans were uninsured? Remember this number? Huge outcry. 40 million Americans were uninsured. More than about 13% of our population had no medical insurance at all. So, and you never hear that talked about it. That was a pretty big national crisis. The richest country on the face of the earth, you know, 1 out of 10 people or 1 out of 9 people didn't have insurance. ACA was formulated in response to that. I'm not weighing in on whether I think it was a good piece of legislation or not. It was 1,900 pages. It's incredibly convoluted. And as you can imagine, many powerful groups weighed in on it. Everything from lobbyists to the American Medical Association to providers to insurance companies. And basically what came out of it was this expanded health care coverage for all. Everybody in this country should have access to health care coverage. That was premise number one. From a free market standpoint, the more customers you have for something, what does that normally do to the cost of something? It drives it down. That did not happen. We're going to see why in a second. And that in order to expand healthcare coverage for all, we're going to attack in some different areas. One is if you're a business employer with 50 or more employees, you need to provide some sort of health insurance coverage for your folks. If you're an employer with less than 50 employees, the government can help you do that with some subsidizations. If you're self-employed, you should have access to insurance through a state-based health insurance exchange. And if you're indigent, we should expand Medicare so that more folks have access if they're financially impaired or low income, to accessible and adequate health insurance. So that's the premise. Can't really argue with the premise. So, so this insurance that employers are providing need to meet some minimum essential coverage tests. This is one of the things that the current administration has taken aim at. And some of the minimum essential coverage tests are things like it's got to provide access to women's reproductive health. It's got to provide access to well care. I've got to be able to get a mammogram and a pap smear and my kids. It doesn't actually include dental care, which is a gaping hole in my mind. It's a lot of systemic disease comes from bad teeth.
You can buy it. It's just extra.
Certainly you buy it.
The Care Act, we offer discounted plans.
Right, but it's not wrapped in the bid. No. And you have to have access to birth control. You have to have access to well baby care. And so you can't offer a health care package that doesn't include what most of us would probably reasonably concur are basic essential services. Okay, so that was one of the premises of that. That has been stripped. Okay, that is currently no longer in force. Okay, what happened? I mean, we talked about this for 100 hours, but just to give you a really quick overview, the first couple years of implementation of ACA were really non-controversial tenets of it. Pre-existing conditions. You couldn't be denied health care coverage for pre-existing conditions. Very few people had beef with that. They got rid of lifetime maximums. And I've seen this in my tax practice a number of times. It is not that, so a lot of insurance policies would have a lifetime maximum of $1 million or $2 million. And you think, oh my gosh, that's a whole lot of money. No, it's not. You've got your kid over in Seattle in cancer care, you're going to roll through $1 million a year. And then the insurance just was paying. And then you mortgage your house and that buys you another month and a half. And then you're in bankruptcy. Okay. So that ACA got rid of lifetime maximums. ACA got allowed young people to stay on their parents' coverage until they were 26 rather than 24. You know, recognizing that during the Great Recession, a lot of young people were unable to find jobs out of college. So things like that, those were not the controversial pieces. What was the eminently most controversial facet of ACA?
Requiring all
The mandatory requirement that every human being in this country needs to have health insurance or pay a penalty. It basically went in front of the Supreme Court, I believe, 2010 or 11, and as unconstitutional tax is the premise of the lawsuit. And it was overturned, which was pretty, not the ACA wasn't overturned, the lawsuit was, I don't have the right term, was thrown up. It was the ACA was allowed to stay in place. So I believe it was last year, 2017, that the individual mandate portion of ACA was overturned congressionally. The whole act was not repealed, but it's being, individual tenets are being chipped away at, which really makes it essentially lose its effectiveness. So whether you think it's a good law or a bad law, has really been very little proposed to replace it. And we'll see, what happens in the future. The other thing that's slightly interesting is the opponents of ACA will talk about how we've had double-digit increases in premiums. But if you look at the trajectory of premium increases prior to ACA and post-ACA on a national average, they're still unacceptable increases, don't get me wrong, but they're actually less than they were before ACA. And those are charts that opponents don't ever put up. So it's very interesting.
Monopolization of insurance companies, which was a really huge thing for the ACA. We were trying to make it so insurance companies couldn't monopolize and keep increasing their rates and increasing their rates.
Right, but the problem that's happened, which effectively, particularly like low population rural states like ours, what's happened to our ability to choose here in Montana? We've got two providers. And I can't quote these numbers off the top of my head, but there's a significant number of states where they've only got one insurance provider. Because what happened to insurance companies? All of a sudden, all the people that were uninsured are now in the insurance rolls. And these folks, this is a huge, broad generalization, but do they have a tendency to be the healthier population or the least healthy population? They have that tendency to be the least healthy population because they haven't been getting well care, et cetera, on an ongoing basis. So these folks come with increased costs, and that erodes profit margins for insurance companies. My personal belief, as long as you've got a profit motive wrapped into this whole national healthcare system, I don't see how you're going to encourage.
So does the insurance company not want to take them with a pre-existing condition?
Right, but they had to.
Yeah.
They had to. So now, say I'm an insurance company that traditionally, shown a 28% yield on my bottom line. And you guys all of a sudden all show up on my policy, mandated to show up on my paying me premiums. And I mean, you're a heavy smoker and he's diabetic and he's super overweight, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And none of you have had health care for 15 years. What are my payouts going to look like? My profit rate margin is not going to be 28%. I'm not paying out 8-digit, CEO bonuses at year end anymore. And people were insurance executives in the lobby was very uncomfortable with that. I don't want to have to take you. I don't want to have to take young women that I know have a high chance of getting pregnant, which is very expensive, right? So I wanted to hand pick who I covered. So insurance companies just bailed out of markets. They just said, if you're making us do this, we're just going to bail. And so what's left then, really, even though the whole purpose of this was to reduce monopolization, was the eradication of a lot of the competitive forces. And then I can come in and say, well, yeah, sure, I'll cover you, all you guys, but you're going to pay 20% more in premiums than you did last year. I mean, it's not a sustainable model. We pay a higher amount per capita in this country for healthcare than any industrialized nation in the world. And our numbers, from everything from infant mortality to addiction to obesity to mortality rates, are 20 to 30th in the world. I mean, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. You look at countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, even Costa Rica, Denmark. Their costs per person are so much lower, and all of their health statistics are so much higher. That's really a national crisis. But if you're an insurance executive and you're cashing checks for $10 million a year on your W-2, you don't want the system to change. Why would you? Okay. Anybody else know anything about this? Do you feel like I'm painting a fair portrait?
The only doubt how much money the insurance companies make is they provide a rent free. But there's a house where the utilities, the resident maintenance,
Yeah.
I guess it's the only thing.
I guess it's the opposite. Yeah. It's, yeah. But you try and take something like this where there's so much money being made and strip the profit motive. Good luck.
Who are the two providers you said?
In Montana, there's Pacific Health and Blue Cross Blue Shield. I mean, in our heyday, we only had 5 providers, so it's not like there was 30 and now there's 2. But 5 is a whole lot more to shop out than 2. Okay, state laws. State laws differ obviously by state. And so every state has got to provide workers' compensation. And we'll take a look at that when we go through the state portion of the class. And then some states, also 5 states plus Puerto Rico, require employers to provide disability benefits. What's a disability benefit?
It's like where you're hurt and you can't do the job that you used to be able to do.
Right.
So, yeah.
But I thought we got that from the Fed. I thought we got that through OASCI.
Your employer can also be held responsible for pay the government,
Okay, so,
especially if they have another job.
well, okay, so here's the scoop. Workers' comp, that's a really good point. Workers' comp is called, terminology just like a policy of exclusive remedy. An exclusive remedy means if I'm hurt on the job, that my exclusive right to compensation or to be made whole is through workers' comp. So I can't sue my employer unless I can provide or prove gross negligence. Otherwise, I've got to go through workers' comp. And conversely, they've got to help rehabilitate me, pay my medical costs, pay my wages while I'm out of work through workers' compensation. Okay. The exception then is if there was gross negligence, and if I can show gross negligence, I can go outside of this as my right of exclusive remedy. But also in states here, this is referring to what if I get hit on my bike driving home from work and I become unable to work for 6 months. Is the University of Montana going to pay me through workers' comp? Well, no, of course not. I wasn't hurt on the job. I was from commuting to my job. What happens to me for that 6 months? Who pays for my medical bills? Who pays for my salary? Go ahead. Hopefully my health insurance is going to cover my health costs. Who's going to cut me my paycheck for 6 months? No one. No one. I do not have a wage for the next 6 months. I can take my vacation pay, my sick pay. Say that takes me a month down the road. What happens that next 5 months? No check. That's what disability is. We do not have it in Montana. It's primarily states that you would call more liberal. So it's a tax on employers that they pay into a pool to cover wages for folks if they are hurt, even if the disability, illness, or disease did not arise from employment.
Even though we don't have state disability laws, a lot of employers now are providing access to like AFLAC
Yes, ma'am, and that's, thank you very much for bringing that up. You certainly, as an individual, can purchase your own disability policy, or you may be blessed enough to go to work for an employer that pays for your disability policy. They're not expensive. I think, I have it here, I think we pay $12 a month for my husband's disability policy through Aflac.
Yeah.
It's really nothing.
And
For $12 a month to make sure that if something happened to him, we get a paycheck every month. It's actually not the whole thing. I think it's 66% of it. But I mean, you know, most families, you can't just take one salary out of it and they'd be just fine, right? Yeah, good point. So, yeah, lesson learned here is if you have somebody else to worry about besides yourself, or somebody else couldn't step in and pay your bills for you, it's worth looking at private disability insurance.
So what ensures that you're able to keep your job while you're out of that? Does that mean you have no insurance?
Say that one more time, what?
So basically, you said you get hurt and you're trying to find a way to get a paycheck in the next 6 months. But what is ensuring that your job's not going to be able to fire you?
If you get hurt off of the job, well, the Family Medical Leave Act gives you 12 weeks.
Someone else, if you use it yourself.
I don't believe so. You're protected 12 weeks with the Family Medical Leave Act that we looked at on Wednesday, right at MLA.
Yeah.
That ensures you the right to come back to your former job. But past that 3 months, say that you're out for 8 months, say your whole body was shattered from this bike accident and you're in the police for, 8 months, right? I don't know that there's anything that requires your employer to hold your job for that extended time period. We're talking about different things, aren't we? We're talking about being compensated, getting a paycheck on out. We're talking about health insurance coverage. We're talking about maybe I'm going to need some sort of vocational rehab because I'm never going to go back to being a UPS driver if I, shattered my pelvis, right? So things like that. I mean, so those are all kind of different things. And then the guarantee of returning to your job, maybe or maybe not. If you're hurt on the job, your workers' comp, they've got to get you back to your former job or something at the same pay grade. But off the job, I don't think so.
But the FMLA applies to yourself as well?
Yes.
As not self-leave?
Yeah. Absolutely. Good questions. Okay, human resource and payroll accounting systems. I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time here. HR and payroll are not synonymous terms. A lot of people think that's the same thing. Payroll is usually housed in accounting or in the fiscal area, and then they liaise with human resources from the money standpoint. Human resources are the folks that process and do all the recruiting and the training and the retention and the compensation matrices and the performance evaluations and those sorts of things. So they liaise very closely, but they're not one and the same. Basically what I just said. Okay, the FLSA, what does that stand for again?
Fair Labor Standards Act.
Yeah, the Fair Labor Standards Act, which if you recall, what were the two very important things that the FLSA gave us? Child labor, yeah. I think the EEOC was its own law. The equal pay, so child labor laws, equal pay, minimum wage, and overtime. It's a huge sweeping law. Do you remember what part of history the FLSA came from? It was part of the FDR's big grand sweeping, the New Deal, which also gave us Social Security, Unemployment Tax Acts, Medicare. Really, I mean, it was a big social engineering piece of legislation, which is like in the current climate, it's just incredible to even imagine something like that ever was established. At any rate, the FLSA is carved out of these four things that we just kind of reviewed. requires stringent record keeping. In other words, I can't as an employer just say like, oh gosh, I don't know what I did with my payroll records from 2016. I mean, I will be severely fined and penalized if I don't have adequate backup in place to maintain those records and produce them on demand if there's a wage claim or whatever. It's got to be embodied in this whole payroll HR system. And some of the other pieces of that are, not really extraneous, but are in addition to the, the numerical quantitative records, are things like job descriptions, requisition for personnel, applications. Why do I have to keep those things on file? Say I recruited for I run a large animal vet clinic and I recruited for a vet tech last year.
To prove that you were there during.
Absolutely. You come back to me this year because I hired Tanner instead of you, and you're like, I'm pretty sure you hired him over me because he's a guy. And I better have my ducks in a row. I better be able to pull a job description that shows exactly what the facets and requirements of the job were. I need to pull applications, and if I'm really doing my due diligence and keeping myself as free as possible from litigation or potential litigation, I've had panel interviews where we've got some sort of scoring matrix, and we go through your resumes and your experience and your credentials, and it's not the fact that my kid and his kid used to play softball together, they got him the job. It's really based on a quantitative matrix that I'm able to bring in front of anybody and say, boy, he was evidently more qualified. Gender is not an issue. Okay, and these things are really, employment litigation is super expensive. My husband is CFO of the youth homes, and they've got 180 employees, and they work everywhere from Hamilton up to the Flathead Valley. They've got, I think, 11 youth homes and foster homes, and I mean, just a lot going on. And I mean, I'm making this up totally, but just anecdotally, I can tell you that takes 10% of his time is dealing with mitigation and lowering risk around employment litigation, because it can eat up a lot of money and a lot of time. So, and to preclude all that, you want to make sure that you're obviously recruiting from a good pool, that you're actually hiring people that have a fit with your organization. I mean, there's a lot of, you're providing adequate training, you're doing timely performance evaluations, and using the results of those evaluations to do more training if necessary. If somebody's not going to work out, that you're issuing warnings, you're documenting it. I mean, there's a lot to it. And that's very integrally related with payroll. If you go to work for a small company, they're not going to have an HR director. And guess what they're going to expect out of their bookkeeper or staff accountant? That you're also HR. Like, it's just like this little tack-on thing, right? And while you're at it, could you maintain the network system and the peripheral devices? So in Montana, in these small companies, 10, 12, 15 employees, there are lots of different hats. You have to be aware of how much is involved in the HR hat. Okay, this is kind of digging in a little bit, maybe more than I want to go right now, but it's just talking about some things. When you're hiring, when you're in the hiring process, pre-hire process, can you ask people things like, what's your gender? What's your national origin? What religion do you participate in? Well, you can if there's a bona fide reason. I run a women's health clinic, and I'm unsure of somebody's gender. I can ask, what's your gender? Because this is a women's health clinic. Or if you're teaching at the Missoula Catholic school system, I can ask what religion you are affiliated with, because this is a Catholic high school. So for bona fide reasons, you certainly can ask. But like at the University of Montana, for example, that teach an accounting class, I can't ask where you're from, what's your national origin. That has no bearing whatsoever. If you're teaching Spanish, that may be a bona fide question because I want an indigenous speaker. So you get the point. Background checks, that's a huge issue now. You've got to make sure that it complies with the FCRA. Aptitude and psychological testing, lots and lots of court cases surrounding these. Are they lawful? Are they quantitatively meaningful? Can you authenticate the results? I generally would say unless there's a really compelling reason to stay away from them just because of the lawsuit potential, and you have to keep your applications on file for at least a year. Reference inquiries, I would tell you they're kind of going the way of the dinosaur. You really only, if you're called for a reference, should really only respond as to yes or no, the person was employed here and what were the dates of employment. The person's going to want you to get, want you to become chatty Cathy. Well, how did she fit in? And did she, merge with the culture of your company? Was she timely? Was she competent? And, did she dress appropriately or whatever? You are going to want to stay clear of all that because again, I'm like, I see maybe one little thing like, her daycare didn't open till 7, so she never got there till 7:10, even though the shift started at 7. And then they don't hire you, and then you find out down the road that I said that. Really, show me the time cards that show I punched in at 7:10. How do you document what you said about me? That's probably not a great example. It'd be more something like, yeah, she did her work, she showed up on time, but she didn't really integrate with the company culture. That's really ephemeral. That's really hard to prove. So honestly, really diminishes the credibility of inquiries.
I've heard some temp agencies, people on the phone, they'll ask if somebody is eligible to be hired.
I really stay away from that too because I say no. Why? Well, they were dismissed for theft. Now you've conveyed personal information. Oh my God, I've got a libel or a slander suit on my hands because the theft was never proven. Just.
So if you just say no, they're not eligible for rehire, that's all.
I would say I'm not able to answer that question. And honestly, I get calls all the time about students. And I really can say, in the old days, especially in community sites where I know all the people that are calling me, because I worked with them forever, and then, yeah, he'd make a great fit in your organization because, just the kind of, he's an outdoorsy guy, and yeah, he'll fit in great at Rocky Mountain Health Foundation, for example. Or, she's not going to probably work, because blah, blah, blah. Oh my goodness, I would never say any of that anymore. I can't talk about whether you showed up for class. I can't talk about what kind of work you turned in. I can't talk about whether you get along with your fellow students or not. Honestly, all I can do is authenticate whether or not you graduated with an AAS in accounting tech, which is public information. So it's not helpful at all. Reference inquiries have really kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. Employee history, again, you really want to, what happens to the time? Go through and have a very thorough recording of performance evals, comp adjustments, disciplinary issues. Employers that I work with, I help them craft it's all digital now, obviously, but some sort of an employee manual where if employees are disciplined or warned or evaluated, that everything is documented and that they sign off that they've received it. You can't come back and go, well, I never knew I was being warned for being late or making errors or whatever, things like that. So the payroll system itself, there's 2 basic records, which is really we're going to spend a whole bunch of the rest of the semester looking at. One is called a payroll register, and very few companies anymore are out manual payroll registers, although that's not to say they don't exist. They do. I've still got a couple of people at tax time that bring me their hand-recorded data, which is fine. But this is what's going on behind the scenes in your software. Who am I paying? How many hours do they work? What's their rate? What's their gross? Do they have any overtime? What's their net? What are their deductions? In other words, anything I take out of your gross pay, I've got to tell you why I'm taking it out, and I've got to send it to someone else. I took out Social Security, I took out HI, I took out FIP and SIP. I can take out 401k contributions, I can take out union dues, I can take out garnishments. right? I can take out, you want to put money in a savings account every month. And then here's your net check. That's a payroll register. And then those numbers really go to a card. In the old days, we had big boxes with employee cards, and we pulled them out and we transcribed all the numbers from the payroll register to the employee earnings records. I'm dating myself tremendously here. And this is, each person has one of these, and it accumulates your earnings over here in the cumulative earnings column, so that at any point in time when you say, how much have I made this year? I can say $3,045.42. That's important for things at year-end, like cutting W-2s. And it's also, if you remember from Monday and Wednesday, some taxes, we stopped taking them at a cap. So I've got to track your cumulative earnings. So with that said, I do want to spend the last at least 10 minutes. Got to be about done with this. Okay, this has got to be the last one, right? Okay, yep. This last slide just talks about the fact that because of everything I've just been talking about, the tremendous amount of pieces of legislation you have to comply with and the complexity of processing payroll, that a lot of companies now it's like, I'm just going to outsource it. And that's very much a trend in lots of these ancillary services in the business, right? So if I run an optical shop, I grind glass and do prescriptions and deal with people's eyesight. I don't want to be, spending 6 hours a week processing payroll when I could be using that to get my social media site up recruiting more clients, right? So I outsource it. And that really makes a lot of sense, keeping your focus on your core vision of your business and outsourcing the things that are peripheral, that are quote unquote value added to your business. So lots of small and mid-sized businesses are hiring, then they're responsible for complying with all these laws. That's what you're paying them to do. And it reduces risk in lots of these different areas. So IRS correspondence, Department of Revenue correspondence, workers' comp correspondence, those things all take a ton of time and don't add any value to your business. Okay, so the last 10 minutes I want to spend on this very tiny document that I posted on Moodle. And these are just numbers that I'm going to ask you to memorize. You probably are going to want to print this out as well and keep it, in your notebook or in your binder, however you organize your stuff. But this is really the guts of what we're doing in here. Taxes are split into 2 sections. The employee pays them out of his or her paycheck, and then some of them the employer pays. And here's what it looks like. And then some of them are capped, which means once I hit this number, then I stop paying the tax. Okay? What does OASDI stand for? We call it Social Security. What do the letters stand for? Old age. And survivors. And disability insurance. Old age, survivors, and disability insurance. I'm not real keen on that term old people as that's slowly becoming one. But they say things like 60s, but it's 40, which is like, okay. We do live longer. Which means really, though, technically, you have to save more if you're going to live longer and still retire at what traditional ages were, which is a little alarming, like from the actuarial standpoint.
With computer technologies, it's going to get easier and easier for people that not have to do, lifting stuff. They can just
continue to work. Right, and the idea is that traditional retirement measures are dissipating too. Very few people are like done working and hit the rocking chair at 65. I mean, they're doing lots of different things to keep vibrant and also keep earning income. So OASDI, Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance, we talked about this on Wednesday. Once you make $127,200, you no longer pay this tax. I have never myself had this problem, but Once you get there, you get to stop paying the tax. You're-
You don't have to pay of anything over?
Or anything over. So that's what the cap means. Once they've taken 6.2% out to 127.2, I stop paying the tax. And my employer stops matching. So I think I put this on the board the other day, 12.4 cents out of every dollar goes into Social Security. It's pretty significant. But you also have to recognize that when the Social Security program was designed in the 30s, there was about 6.2 workers for every retired person. And now that number is about 2. There's 7 less kids. There's more people retired. That's statistical. The triangle's turned upside down. So when people talk about it becoming actuarially defunct, in other words, going broke, it's just a matter of population trends, isn't it? A lot of baby boomers retiring. It's projected to go broke in, the numbers are all over this, but 2030, roughly, which is year I turned 70, super handy. So we'll see. You know, there's obviously going to need to be changes in Social Security. Nobody wants to touch it politically because ARP is an extremely strong lobby. But the reality is, I mean, it's not going to be solvent unless taxes are raised, caps are raised, or benefits are cut. I mean, it's just numbers. It's not, what do you do with that philosophy around numbers? So HI is Medicare, right? Stands for health insurance. And that is 1.45% and no cap. So if I'm one of those insurance executives that makes $10 million a year, I pay 6.2% up to the first 127.2, but I pay 1.45 on the whole amount. And the hated 0.9% additional. That's one of the primary funders of Obamacare. I talked about that in there, was that my income tax class? Okay. I feel like this started, I feel like everything's wrapped into one. And then I'm working on textbooks for the new edition of all the new tax law. So when I go home at night, all this stuff is like, oh yeah, no, that's not what I'm doing anymore on this one year. So it gets a little convoluted. This is still in law, but this is under attack. I would imagine this is going to go away. But what it says right now is if you make over $200,000 a year, you pay an additional 0.9%. So this number over here becomes 2.35%. But the employer doesn't match that 0.9, that stays at 1.45. Do you need me to re-explain that, or do you understand that? Because that's a little confusing. And if I put these two taxes together, what do I call those? FICA. FICA, which stands for Federal Insurance Contribution Act. I would suggest to you guys this weekend that you should, this might be an antiquated way of doing it, but I'm still fond of it when I've got to memorize stuff. Just putting them on flashcards or whatever it is and learning all those acronyms, because I'll probably quiz on that about the end of next week. So all those acronyms that you see in the PowerPoints, what's FICA, what's FMLA, what's OASDI, what's HI, what's SSA, what's PBGC? You should know all this. The last two taxes that an employee pays is fit and set. Federal income tax and state income tax. And here's your rates. But these have changed with the TCJA. But we're using these because that's the edition we're in. But the rates have changed. And SIF. FUTA and SUTA stands for what? Federal Unemployment Tax Act and State Unemployment Tax Act. And these are only employer paid. These do not come out of the employee's paycheck. I'm going to pay 0.6% up to $7,000 per employee per year to FUTA. But that's just an administrative tax. This is where the real unemployment benefits come from, SUTA. And your rate depends upon how long you've been in business, how much turnover you have, what your claims history looks like, etc. And the current cap is 32,000, that goes up every year monthly. We didn't get to the homework or chapter 2. I think I'm gonna need to ratchet back the discussions in class and maybe a little more tightly scope the PowerPoints. So we will see you on no, and we will not see you on Monday, it's Labor Day. We'll see you on Wednesday. You should read chapter 2. And we will get homework for chapter 1 done first thing on Wednesday. I don't want it now. You should be prepared by next Friday to reiterate the tax tables and the acronyms. Right, 8, 10-point list.
Pretty much have the caps and.
You need to basically just be able to replicate this.
Okay.
And I'm not a big believer in like memorize this or that, because that's not really a proven pedagogical method, but for our purposes in here, you gotta know these rates, so you need to learn them. So if you're taking Spanish, you'd have to learn the alphabet, right? Okay, have a great 3-day weekend. And